Welcome to the Foster Files, a podcast about animal rescue and animal welfare. My name is Kelly, and every week I talk about issues surrounding animals in this country and to the people who are passionate about making their lives better. On this week's episode, I'm joined by licensed professional counselor, certified in compassion fatigue, pet loss, and trauma, Jennifer Blough. She's also the author of To Save a Starfish, a compassion fatigue workbook for the animal welfare warrior, and the forthcoming book by Beyond Compassion Fatigue, Trauma, Resilience, and Recovery in Animal Care and Advocacy. Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Kelly. Good to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
I found that there is a theme among a lot of the people that I talk to, a theme that you are obviously very intimately familiar with. And that's really talking about compassion fatigue and how this passion that we have all found can really kind of wear down the soul a little bit. And so I really just wanted to find someone who was specifically learned about compassion fatigue in the animal welfare space, pick their brain a little bit, get some tools and resources from them, and really just go from there. But before we really dive into kind of the meat and the potatoes of it, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and what led you to this work?
Sure. Yeah. So I unfortunately, as I think a lot of people do, learned about compassion fatigue the hard way. So back when I got involved in, so I've been involved in activism ever since I was like a preteen. And that's because of my very, very progressive animal rights activist grandmother who kind of taught me the ropes. And then in my 20s, I became involved in animal sheltering and burned out. And then years later, went back and became an animal control officer, again, burned out. And all this time, I was actually struggling with compassion fatigue, but of course, I had no idea. Back then, we were not talking about this. I had never even heard the term until I went back to grad school, and my idea was, well, my goal was I'm gonna become a licensed counselor because I was doing some counseling in the f like, any animal control officer will tell you, you wear so many hats, and one of those hats is that of of a therapist. You're out in the field and you're counseling people, and I found that I had this real kind of connection for, helping people or listening to people who maybe I had to deliver some bad news about, I found this deceased dog, and had a collar on it. So you have to go and deliver the bad news. And I found that I was really good at kind of holding space for people who were struggling. And so my initial thought was, okay, I'm burning out. I'm going to go back to school, get a degree in psychology, and actually do this for a living. And then, we had this one class, and the professor's like, okay, tonight we're going to talk about something that therapists have to be very careful of, and that's this thing called compassion fatigue. And as he's talking, like my jaw just hits the floor because I'm thinking back of all the decades of my own experience in be it animal welfare or animal activism. He's naming off symptoms, and I'm like, check, 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 check. And it was kind of right then and there that I thought, that's it. This is going to be my focus. When I get my degree, I'm going to be like the one standing on the mountaintop screaming about compassion fatigue and burnout and secondary traumatic stress. And I'm sure we'll kind of go into each of those a little bit later. But it's just become my life's passion because I can combine two things, right? So I can combine my passion for helping animals by helping the people who are working with the animals. And so that's kind of how, in a nutshell, how I kind of got to this point.
Well, I love that you specifically said, I can help animals by helping the people that are helping animals, because even in the very short time that I have been, really actively fostering and volunteering, I've seen a handful of people just kind of leave the space altogether. And there's a multitude of reasons, maybe for that person. Maybe there's one specific event that sort of, drives them to make that final decision, but it's usually not that one event. It's usually like a run up of things, right? And so that one event might be the thing that drives them to do it, but up until that point, they were feeling worn down or tired. But before I maybe put words in your mouth, why don't you talk a little bit about some of those symptoms that your professor, noted that you recognized in yourself that others may recognize in themselves that are telling them that something's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to first give a brief description of what compassion fatigue is. And then, as far as the symptoms, I could literally just sit here and just ramble off. I mean, there's so many symptoms. But what I like
Mhm.
to do to help people kind of get a better context is describe some of the symptoms in what we call the compassion fatigue cycle, if that's all right with you.
Please, please.
Okay. Perfect, perfect. So first I'll just give a kind of a general definition of what compassion fatigue is. Compassion fatigue is often kind of confused with burnout, and burnout is actually one of the components of compassion fatigue. So we have two main components: burnout as well as secondary traumatic stress. So for those listeners who maybe are not familiar with these terms, secondary trauma is something that you experience indirectly. So, for example, if you work in a shelter and you are exposed to a lot of abuse cases, neglect cases, things like that, or if you're in activism and you're seeing a lot of exploitation, you can actually become traumatized. It's not directly happening to you, but you are experiencing, witnessing, hearing about it in a suffering person or animal. Okay. So, secondary traumatic stress is kind of the accumulation of all these secondary traumas to the point where they start to become, you know, you start to become traumatized and displaying symptoms. Now, burnout, on the other hand, it has more to do with our relationship to the environment in which we're working or volunteering. So, this could look like um, you work or volunteer at a shelter or a rescue, and like most shelters and rescues, they're underfunded, they're understaffed, there's limited resources. We're all working within a broken system, right? So this can be at a micro level in our organization, and it could be at a macro level when we're dealing about just the kind of systems that exist with poor animal welfare laws, things like that. And so it's your interaction with either the micro or the macro environment that make up the burnout component. You put these two things together and now you have compassion fatigue, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of like with a lot of complex feelings, it's probably very difficult to sort of individualize them for people and to say, this one means this and this one means this. Um, I think what it might be helpful is, how do we identify that something is going on with us? And then how do we mitigate that? Like, how do we deal with that? What steps can we take to maintain, hopefully, the good work that we're doing, but also make sure that we're protecting ourselves and doing right by our own selves?
Yeah, so I think having an awareness, first of all, is like the most important step. So I think if I had had an awareness years ago, not that it would have taken away the pain, right? I always say there's a difference between pain and suffering in this work. There's nothing I can say. There's no book I can write. There's no podcast. There's nothing that's going to take away the pain. This work is going to hurt, period. But the suffering is when we kind of get stuck in that hurt. And so, again, had I known about this years ago, I think things would have been a little bit different for me. And so I think this will be a good time to kind of talk about the compassion fatigue cycle, because I think if you can kind of maybe pinpoint where you're at in the cycle, first of all, I think it can help normalize your feelings, right? There's nothing wrong with you. You're not crazy, you're not weak, you're not too sensitive. All the things I thought I was back when I was struggling with this. I thought I was alone. I wasn't. And so I think, if you can kind of recognize where you're at, then maybe you can take some steps to, like you said, mitigate things. So the first stage in this compassion fatigue cycle is actually what we call the zealot phase. And we've all been there. This is when, you get your first job at the shelter and you are going to save the world. You're going to do this and that. And you're never going to take a day off. You're never going to take vacations. You're going to say yes to everything and you're going to foster everyone. And because of this, it's you are living life by emotion only, right? You're being driven by passion, driven by your heart. And it's such a beautiful thing. But for anyone that's married knows that the honeymoon phase can't last forever. And why is that? Because we never get anything else done, right? If that honeymoon lasted forever, there'd not be a lot else kind of going on. And so the same is true for animal work, So reality starts to kind of sink in, and when reality starts to sink in, we could move into, so if you're not doing anything to kind of mitigate that, you are all in. You could kind of fall into what we call the irritability phase. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to recognize this. This is when you start to
Mhm.
become irritable. You start to become frustrated. You might start to become resentful. So you could be like resentful of people who, oh, it must be nice to take a day off, or must be
Mhm.
nice, must be nice. You start to become like cynical, like my favorite thing, not favorite thing, but like my thing was like, I hate everybody. I hate the world.
Mhm.
I was just resentful of everyone. I hated everyone. My worldview began to shift. Like literally everyone
Mhm.
abuses animals except the people who work
Mhm.
here. Everyone abuses it.
Right.
You start to become critical of others, so you start looking at the newbies who are in the zealot phase, and you're like, "You'll learn," you know.
Mhm.
And again, if you y- y- you know you if you don't do anything, if you don't kind of start setting boundaries, if you don't start processing some of the things you're seeing, you could then kind of advance into what we call the withdrawal phase. Now, this is where we kind of emotionally start to pull away. The wall kind of starts to really go up in an effort to protect ourselves. We might start to avoid things. This could be like people, places, even animals, anything that like reminds us of a painful situation or causes a painful situation. We might start kind of avoiding those things. We might stop engaging or enjoying things that we once used to. And we might even start to use like unhealthy coping skills at this point in order to kind of numb that pain. So maybe it's, you're having a couple drinks after work and those drinks are turning into more drinks after work, or maybe you're using substances or even things like social media. Anything taken to an extreme is obviously can be a bad habit. And then again, if you don't kind of do something to break that cycle, then you could fall into what we call the zombie phase. And it's so interesting. So, working at an animal shelter and working in an animal control agency, you see you can now looking back, I can see like all the different people. So and so is in this phase, so and so is in this phase, I was in this
Mhm.
phase. But the zombie phase is those people who you look at and you're like, do they even care anymore? Because they're just like on
Mhm.
autopilot. It's almost like they have no emotions. They're just detached. They seem really kind of disconnected from their work, disconnected from the mission. That, like I said, they're just on autopilot. They're just numb. That's why they call it the zombie phase. And then again, if we don't take steps to mitigate that, to break the cycle, we can go into the final stage, which is that now we come to a fork in the road. So this is called the I don't like this word, but pathology versus renewal or maturation. And basically it's like you can go one of two ways. If you stay on the path you're on, the compassion fatigue can now turn into something. So compassion fatigue is not a diagnosable mental disorder, at least right now, but it could turn into something like clinical depression, an anxiety disorder, even PTSD. Um, Sometimes people become suicidal at this stage. They may even leave the field at this stage because they're completely fried. Or you have learned along the way Maybe you've gone to therapy, you've done some healing, you've processed the trauma and the grief, you've learned some healthy coping skills, you've set some boundaries, and now you can go into what's called the renewal phase. And this is where like I said, you've learned to heal. It still hurts, but you've learned to process, you've learned to heal, you have some really strong boundaries in place, you have a really strong self-care routine, and this almost renewed sense of purpose, right? And the thing is you can't just arrive at this stage and go, "Oh, I've arrived, everything's good." It's like anything. You just have to keep working to maintain your mental wellness. I sound like a broken record, but I always say that people in these fields cannot take their mental health for granted. You always have to be kind of working at it, and just kind of doing things to make sure you don't kind of slip back into that, what I call the pit of despair.
So, first of all, you don't sound like a broken record. I think it's so interesting. I think it's so interesting that, like, for me, I can only imagine that anybody listening to this, or that's gonna be listening to this, will be going, "Oh, yeah, I recognize that in myself," or "I recognize that in my friend," or "I recognize that in this other volunteer," and the reason that I am pretty confident that that's happening is because I'm having that conversation with myself right now,
Mm,
just
mhm.
listening to you, and so, I think we forget a lot, especially people who are motivated to take care of others, whether it's other people or animals, we forget to take care of ourselves, right? Like it's easier to focus on helping others than it is on focusing on helping ourselves. So, what are some, you mentioned therapy, you mentioned boundaries. Are you able to get a little bit more specific on what some of that self care looks like?
Yeah, again, so it's really going to depend on what stage you're at. So let's say you are at the kind of beginning stage. You're at the zealot phase and you're going, "Oh, man, I want to maybe take some steps right now to make sure that I don't go through the rest of the stages, you know? And so some of the things that you can do at this point are more kind of the kind of lifestyle changes, kind of like the self-help things. Not that I'm saying, don't go to therapy. I think everyone could benefit from therapy. But these are things like, okay, start setting some boundaries now. So for example, when I first started out, I basically, like, stopped hanging out with friends, I stopped engaging in hobbies, unless it had to do with my own animals or the shelter. It's like that became my entire life, and I became like, that was my identity, and I lost
Uh-huh.
all the other parts of who I was. And so I would encourage people in the very early stages of compassion fatigue, make sure that you are maintaining those other parts of you. So if you're someone who loves yoga or gardening or hiking, make sure that you're taking the time to continue to kind of nurture those parts of you as well. And as far as the boundaries, you in the zealot phase, you might want to take on every single um, overtime shift, right? But again, you have to make sure that you are kind of pacing yourself and balancing that work and that passion with, like I said, the other parts of you. And saying no to something, it doesn't mean saying no forever. It means no right now. So, for example, as a foster, a boundary could look like, okay, I'm going to take X amount of time between each foster. So I can
Uh-huh.
kind of just process everything, take a little bit of time for myself. And then by the time that next foster comes around, I'm going to be a lot more I'm gonna have more energy, mental and physical energy. I'm gonna be kinda
Uh-huh.
like I'm gonna reset and be ready to go again rather than foster after foster after foster. And yes, making that decision, it hurts. It is not an easy decision to make, but the thing is, if you keep going and going and going until you burn out, then how effective are you gonna be? You're not gonna be able to help anyone.
Right, right. And that's actually one of the things that I like that you pointed out, and one of the boundaries that we set early on was one foster at a time. It's very easy to get carried away. Not that, somebody has 2 or 3, I'm saying that they're carried away. I'm just saying that, like, for us, having 2 or 3, that would be us getting carried away in our particular situation. So we very early on said one foster at a time, and that's really tough because you have a foster and then you see all these other animals, in our case as dogs, that need these homes, that need a foster, and you go, well, I probably could handle 2. I probably could handle 3. And then right away, you're kind of not keeping that commitment to yourself, that or to your partner or to your family or whatever that looks like. And then you're kind of spiraling into that, well, if I say yes to everything, how capable am I really of maintaining sort of that quality of care, maintaining myself, and maintaining all of those other things that are just as important as saying yes to bringing a dog in the home?
Yeah, I mean, and as much expertise and experience that I have in this, I am not immune from compassion fatigue. And I rely heavily on my husband, and I always say to him, "Honey, you know that my heart is a lot bigger than my brain, so I need your advice on this." So for example, a few
Mhm,
months ago, I had been volunteering at our local shelter, and this little 10-year-old Pomeranian Chihuahua mix had come in and was just a little disaster. And so, I checked in with him. I said, I really, really, really want to foster this dog. He's, medical, special needs little guy, senior, all this. And, we were able to kind of talk about it and, okay, want to make sure that you can, you're the main caregiver. Want to make sure that you have the time and the energy and the mental capacity to take him to all the vet appointments, to be prepared for if, he goes downhill and all this. And so, we talked it through and we agreed, yes, let's bring him on. And then I had to talk to him again. I really want to adopt him. And again, we talked about, okay, are you going to be prepared for if he only lives a couple of years? Are you going to be prepared for that? And again, with the medical issues. And so you just kind of have to take your current situation and kind of evaluate, is this something I can take on right now? Maybe this wasn't something I could have taken on 5 years ago. So again, you just kind of have to evaluate like what's going on in my life right now because every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else, right? And the opposite is true. Every time you say no to something, you are saying yes to something else. So if the shelter calls me and says, can you take a litter of 6 puppies? I'm going to be saying no to my own animals now. I'm going to be saying no to time with my husband. I'm going to be saying no to a lot of other things. So it's hard. It's really, really hard, and I never wanna, like, dismiss that, but it's
mhm.
something that you just really have to kinda learn early on to do. I wish I had learned earlier on, but it's never too late. It's never too late, and I'm still learning, I'm still learning.
So we talked about the zealot phase and setting boundaries. What are some steps that someone can take if they see themselves falling into that irritation phase? I think you said irritation, or I
Yeah,
heard it that way.
yes, it's the irritability phase where you're
Irritability
irritated.
phase. There we go.
Yeah. Yeah, again at this point, kind of the same thing, if and again, I don't want to like say, "Oh, you don't need therapy yet," because again, you can have therapy at like any point, but
Right.
as
I think for me,
Mhm.
and I don't think either one of us is dismissive of therapy. I think what's happening right now is realistically to say not everyone can do it, like even
Yeah,
financially. And so
yeah.
I do like recognizing that and then giving people, alternative ways to address the issues.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you I would say at this point, if you don't have other things in your life going on, such as like unprocessed trauma or, clinical depression, things like that, or again, if you can't afford a therapist, there are different things that you can do. Again, kind of amping up your self-care, kind of reassessing your boundaries. You might start to, at this point, try to look for some other type of support, and this could be like a support group. There are support groups online. I run a very, very inexpensive, it's like half support group, half kind of education type group. Um, And, you could look into coaching, which again, finances kind of limit you on that. That's one thing. But if you can afford coaching, coaching does not go kind of real deep. They can't go real deep by law, like a therapist can. But at this stage, if you're like, you know what, I could just use kind of some accountability, right? I could use someone that is going to kind of help me set goals and stick to those goals and develop some healthy coping skills so I can manage all this stress and grief and trauma. That's a good point for a compassion fatigue coach. But as you kind of go deeper into the cycle, and when things here's where I think professional help is absolutely critical, even if it's just talking to your doctor or maybe finding some low cost therapy options, such as therapists with sliding scales, or there's even interns who often charge a very, very, very low fee. Or if you live by a university or college, a lot of times they will have their master's students at the end of their program. They're starting to offer free or low cost counseling at the college. So that could be an option. But once you start to get into where you're really distressed, you're not just pissed off. You're really distressed. Things are impacting your day to day life, right? So if your functioning is being impacted, your relationships are being impacted, your work is being impacted. Now it's time to start kind of processing things that maybe have been kind of suppressed and stuffed down for a while. Maybe childhood trauma starting to kind of get stirred up. A lot of people, we don't have actual statistics on this, but a lot of people come into these fields with a history of trauma. And a lot of times that's unresolved trauma. And here they go now, they're getting triggered. I mean, this is what happened to me. You come into this field and you get triggered, 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 triggered. And if you don't know exactly what's going on, again, now you start to blame yourself. Man, I'm just not cut out for this. I must be really weak. Maybe I'm just crazy. And so I just, if people get anything out of this, I just want to normalize this and validate that there is nothing wrong with you. Because if there was something wrong with you, we wouldn't be having these conversations because it's affecting so many people. I hope that answered
Right,
I hope
right.
that answered your question.
No, 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 I that was the reason that I emailed you, Jen, is because I don't think I can look at a single episode of having done this over the last, 30 or 31 weeks and not have at least one comment about compassion fatigue
Mhm.
in each episode.
Yeah.
Um and so I think one of the reasons that it was so important for us to talk was I do want the people that are listening, and maybe they're listening at different stages in their volunteer journey. Maybe they're thinking about fostering or thinking about going to an animal shelter, or maybe they're deep in it, or maybe they're really struggling or whatever. I think it's so important for people to know that you're not alone in this
Mm-mm.
at all. There's a whole everybody feels in some way, shape, or form, whether they have felt it and have figured out the coping tools, or whether they haven't figured out the tools yet, or they don't even realize they're deep in it. I mean, it's really happening in any type of work where I think you're faced with the realities of humanity. I guess
Mm.
is a way to put it.
Yeah,
You know
yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the thing is, anyone can burn out. Like any profession can
Right.
burn out because again, it's your interaction with the environment. So like whether you
Right.
are a waitress or a salesperson or a CEO, the work can burn you out. But it's when you add that working with caregiving for a suffering population, that's where the secondary trauma could come into play, and that's why they were teaching us as therapists, "Hey, guys, you're gonna sit there all day long and absorb trauma from other people. You need to be
Mhm.
aware of this, and you need to take steps to make sure that I kind of equate it to a sponge, right? You're gonna absorb all this trauma. If you don't, like, at the end of the day, like, kinda, like, wring out, the sponge, it's you're gonna be saturated in it. I mean, the sponge is gonna get wet every single day. It's gonna hurt every single depending on the position you have, it could hurt every single
Mhm.
day. And again, at the
Right.
end of the day, you gotta wring out that sponge. You gotta find a way, and it's different for everybody. Some people might wanna just kinda meditate. Other people are gonna wanna go for a run. Other people might need to watch, funny cat videos. You have to just kinda play around and experiment with what kind of and I don't wanna say, like, takes your mind off of it, right? So, taking your mind
Mhm.
off of something is not the same thing as, like, denying reality.
Right.
You gotta take a break from reality because reality will kill you if you don't.
Right, right. I'm really glad that you started talking about some self-care tools because that was going to be my next question. Because I think that a lot of people right now, whether they're in a volunteer space or not, a lot of people are saying self-care requires one of these two things, and sometimes both. Requires money and or time. And I
Mhm.
don't feel like I necessarily have either one of those to give. How would you recommend people navigate that feeling within themselves?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up because, like, I've often heard it described as 2 other things, and this was kinda my own definition of self-care was it's a luxury, um,
Yeah.
which kinda goes
Right,
along with
yeah.
time and expense, right? It's
Right,
I
right.
have, like, an entire day and God knows how much money to sit in a spa all day long, that was kind of
Right,
like my
exactly.
yeah, yeah, it was like kind of my work thinking there, or that it was selfish.
Right. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. So you're thinking about I'm thinking about the practicality of like the physical substance of like money or time and you're thinking about sort of the thought process behind it. Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
love that. So how do you recommend people identify those things and then navigate those things?
So, I like to kind of equate this to, being a firefighter, okay? So, if you are a firefighter and you just go running into a burning building without you don't have the uniform, the helmet, the
Mm.
oxygen tank, a you know, water hose, an axe, whatever, uh, you're gonna get burned. You could have a roof cave in and knock you out if you don't have a helmet, or you're gonna die of smoke inhalation.
Mhm.
So firefighters have equipment. Now with them, it is physical equipment. Okay, I just named a lot of pieces of equipment. Well, what do they do in their off time? They're they're working out. They're doing whatever. And the reason that they're working out is because they need to be physically at the top of their game to be able I trained as a firefighter years and years and many, many years ago. And you actually have to be trained in climbing up a ladder with all this stuff on and getting a grown man who may be injured or too afraid to come down by himself. You have to get this person in a cradle position and like shimmy back down the ladder. So you have to be in really top shape. So again, we have to realize that we are the main tool. Yes, if you're a veterinarian or vet tech, you have different tools. If you're an ACO, you have different tools, but you are your main tool. And that's why we
Mhm.
need to really we got to take care of this tool. We can't let the tool get all rusty and exhausted. And I don't know about you, but I don't want someone performing surgery on my dog who has gotten only 3 hours of sleep the night before.
Right.
I don't want someone performing surgery on my dog whose nervous system is so dysregulated they're shaking. And so again, we are the main tool and we have to take care of ourselves physically because most of these jobs are physically demanding. More importantly, we have to take care of ourselves emotionally and mentally because these jobs, when I say job and work, I'm talking professional or volunteer base, they are emotionally exhausting. Again, that's just the nature of the work. We cannot stop the pain. Just like the firefighter, he or she's gonna go in there and it's gonna be hot, right? There's nothing they can do, but they can prevent themselves from getting burned, smoke inhalation, or getting a major head injury when the roof caves in. Does that make sense? How we are the
Yeah.
tool. We got to take care of that tool.
I just wonder, like, I feel like as kind of societally, and this is a very generalized statement, and it's certainly not gonna be true for everybody, but I feel like oftentimes as human beings, and specifically as women, I find this a lot with women, we have so much forgiveness for the needs of others and so much less for the needs of ourselves, right? Like, I've had so many conversations with women where they're like, you know, "Oh, you do need to be resting. How can I help you? What do I need to do for you?" Or how, whatever. But then when it comes to us defining that same type of care for ourselves, a lot of times it's really hard to sort of put those pieces together. And we are falling into that space of feeling like we're being selfish. Why are we like this?
So I'll give you kind of an easy answer and I'll give you a very, very short version
Go
of
for
the
it.
complex answer, right? So I think that I think what comes down to, and again, I don't want to generalize, but so many of us women are, I don't know if it's in our DNA or the way we're raised or maybe both, but we are generally caregivers. We are generally nurturers. We are the ones that, whether we give birth or not, are able to. And so I think we just kind
Mhm,
of have that, not all women, but
mhm,
have that just natural desire to be the caregiver, to be the nurturer. And, whether it's we want to be needed or it's just kind of inherent in us. I think that's part of it. And if you think about it, even if you think about wild animals or birds, they're going to make sure that their babies are fed no matter what. Because mama bear
mhm,
instinct kicks in. And I think the same is true with human women. Mama bear kicks
mhm,
in. It's like, My babies are going to be fed before I get fed." Right. And
mhm.
there's this natural kind of protector within a lot of women. Then we can get really complex, and this is where now you can bring in, okay, perhaps we were in a family where we had to grow up really fast and almost be the parent, right?
Mhm,
Or maybe we had to be
mhm,
kind of the peacemaker in our family, or perhaps we've had childhood trauma and therefore we don't believe that we deserve care. Right? So
mhm.
we could go real complex and real deep with this, and that's why I think we could all use therapy, right? So to kind of figure out, well, what is it about this that makes me what is it about like taking care of myself that makes me so uncomfortable? I
Right.
remember being at that point where even the thought of kind of taking care of myself, I mean, it would bring me to tears and really trigger me. And I had to really kind of work that out as to why that is, why I value myself so little that I am not deserving of just the very, very basic forms of self care. And so I think again that's a definitely a more complex answer, but it's something to think about. If you're kind of recognize your listeners are recognize, kind of think about, is does this maybe stem from maybe the role I played in my family, or, you know, uh, did I kind of grow up thinking that maybe I'm undeserving of being taken care of? And why is that?
I work with a friend right now who's an incredibly talented physical therapist, personal trainer. And I joke around that I always thought life coach was a very kind of a frou-frou concept that I couldn't really get behind, but she feels like my life coach sometimes. And what I love that she says, because I think that I'm really good at, I'll do the self-deprecation thing, like I'll kind of be the butt of my own joke, and it goes back to that whole people can't laugh at you if you're laughing at yourself kind of thing. But when I do that in front of my, really good friend, Kira, I'll do a self-deprecation and she'll look at me and she'll go, "Stop talking about my friend like that."
Mm.
And it's just like this moment of like, "Oh yeah, like I shouldn't be talking about myself that way." So I think it's so encouraging for people to think about the care that they're denying themselves. Would they want to see their friends and the people that they love, would they say that those people don't deserve the care? right? Like,
Absolutely
does
not.
your does your friend not deserve a day off? Does your friend not deserve, some doom scrolling if that's what they like? Does your friend not deserve to have this hobby that makes them happy? Um, at no point, I think, are we gonna say that about the people that we love, yet we accept that for ourselves in a lot of ways. So I think it's just
Absolutely.
so interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we wouldn't demand that of the animals that are in our care either, right? So if you have a foster,
Right.
let's say you have whether it's a behavioral foster or a medical foster, you're not going to like demand, "How dare you rest after your surgery?" or you're
Right.
just not, right? I mean, you're going to, "What do you mean you can't walk yet?" You're not.
Right.
We don't have the same expectations, and again, we could get really complex with why that is because a lot of it has to do with self esteem and identity and possible trauma and this and that.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's a real problem, and then, especially if you have people so I think this is gonna be unpopular with people, but I'm gonna scream it out, that there is this very, very toxic culture within the entire kinda animal welfare and animal activism movements that, if you don't devote 100 basically, if you don't burn out, then it's like a gang initiation, like, you need to burn out in order to prove your commitment, and what that's doing is, A, it's burning people out and they're leaving.
Mhm.
It's also leading to suicide, right? And so either way, I say that this is a battle, and we need every single soldier we can get in this battle, whether it's the dog groomer or the animal control officer or the veterinarian or the undercover investigator, every foster parents. We need every single person involved in this movement that we can. We can't have people leaving the field because they've been shamed for needing to take some time off. We can't have people leaving the field because they've been carrying this trauma alone without being able to talk about it and they end up taking their own lives. We've got to stop the whole martyr mentality. It's not getting us anywhere.
Right. I spoke with, Katya Litsky, who is also an author, and one of the things that she said is, like, in order we have to change our whole perspective on the animal welfare, because if we go in with, and I'm obviously paraphrasing her tremendously, but, if we go in with this idea that we're going to fix something, that means it has to be broken first.
Mhm.
And how do we kind of do better, and how do we change that narrative for ourselves, and do better for each other? So I mean, how do we do better for each other? Because like I think, especially if you're in that irritability phase, you are pissed off at some people, or and it might not even be the people that abandoned the dog, or it might not be the people that abused the cat, or hoarded the birds, or whatever that looks like. You might be pissed at the other people within your organization that ultimately have the same goal that you do. Like, how do you become a better friend to those people and a better volunteer for those around you as well?
Yeah, again, I hate to simplify this, but I think it really comes down to having an awareness, right? So I'm at the point in my life now where so I basically I say that my compassion fatigue is like a pot of water. Sometimes it's just kind of simmering on the back burner. It's like, okay, it's there. I got you. I'm managing it fairly well. And then sometimes it's just like front and center. It is boiling over. And
Mhm.
and I'm so again, not immune to compassion fatigue, still learning, still, have to manage it every single day. But the thing is I now have this awareness and I can say, okay, where am I at kind of in this cycle right now? And what do I need? So I think that the very first piece is recognizing, oh, I'm becoming pissed off at everyone. That's a
Mhm.
sign. That's a red flag. So back when
Mhm.
I didn't know about this, I just thought, God, I'm just turning into this really bitter, angry person. And I looked in the mirror and
Mhm.
I didn't even like the person staring back at me because I had changed. And again, I had no context and I just felt alone. So I think if we can recognize that, oh, this has a name, because I think that can take a lot of the kind of emotional charge out of it. This has a name, which means more than one person in this world, me, has it, right? And so I think we can start recognizing them instead of looking at the senior volunteer who's been there 20 years, or the euthanasia tech who's um, been there her entire career, and we look at those people and we go, they don't even care anymore, or are they in the zombie phase?
Mm.
You know, the newbie that comes in and they're all like, "Yeah, I'm gonna save the world," instead of like rolling your eyes at them, understand that they're in that phase. I was once there. We all were,
Mhm.
and so try to recognize other people in that context. And then, I think that can kind of open the door. If you feel comfortable enough with them, you just want to check in with people. I don't know about today's generation. I come from Gen X. We don't talk about feelings. We don't check in with each other. We do self-deprecation. That's what Gen X does. Right? I mean, we're so, so, so talented at it. So, why give that up?
Yeah.
But just we've got to check in with each other. We've got to stop kind of reinforcing the martyr mentality. I give workshops all over the country, and inevitably, I will have staff come up to me afterwards, after the room starts to clear out. I'll have people come up to me and say, I hear what you're saying, but it's hard because my direct supervisor like works 60 hours a week. They never take a break. They never take their vacation time. They don't even eat lunch. So I feel bad eating lunch. I feel bad leaving on time. I feel
Mhm.
bad taking 2 days off a week. And so we've really got to set an example for people. And that's another thing. It's like I try, and again, it's something I got to work on every single day, but you got to try to kind of live by example, try to model this behavior for other people. Right.
Mhm.
So, if you are in a supervisory role, any kind of leadership role, you've got to let your staff know that it's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to take time off, but it's also okay to be vulnerable, right? So if you're kind of off in the corner crying, we can't we can't label that as weakness. We can't say toughen up. We can't say if you can't handle this, then maybe this isn't the job for you. Instead, we can say, how can I support you? Can I just listen? That might be enough for that person. That could be a life or death moment there for that person. They might decide to kind of open up and get help. You never know where people are at. And so we just got to check in with each other and support each other and stop bashing each other online. This isn't a competition. We need to stop competing with each other. This is not about, oh, well, I'm an activist, so I do more than you. Oh, well, I'm this, so I do more than you. And we got to stop. Again, we need every single soldier in every single role, whether you are an activist or whether you are fundraising. Behind the scenes, boots on the ground, it doesn't matter. We are all important, and all of our experiences need to be validated.
What is if you could, because you said you don't wanna summarize or simplify too much, but I'm gonna ask you to, as we kind of approach the end of our conversation. What is something that you'd like to leave people with? What's if you could warn people about prior to getting into this industry, or if you could directly hit the people that have been in it for a really long time, what is one piece of information you'd really like to leave people with today, Jen?
Yeah, I've mentioned this, a couple times during the podcast, but I really want to kind of drive it home because it's something that I feel it's so simple, but it made a profound difference in my life. And that was when I learned from a compassion fatigue expert. His name is Dr. Eric Gentry. When I really learned that concept of there's a difference between pain and suffering. My goal this whole time was like, how can I stop feeling the pain? How can I stop feeling the pain? How can I stop the hurt? How you can't. And so I think there has to be an acceptance of that. Stop banging your head against the wall trying to stop the pain. Put your effort into feel the pain, be able to process the pain, move on from the pain so you don't end up in suffering. Right? So the suffering is that depression every single day, the PTSD, the not wanting to get out of bed, the having suicidal thoughts, that's the suffering. The pain is noticing it, doing and again, I don't want to say, well, suffering's an option. I hate when people say that. But I want to let you know that if you feel the pain, that's because you care. That's because you care a lot. So just try to do what you can do to manage the suffering part.
I love that. I I said that we would talk about a foster spotlight today. And one of the things that you mentioned to me was, I can't narrow it down. I can't narrow it down to just one
Yeah.
dog. So I thought today might really be a great opportunity, especially when we talk about fatigue. Today would be a great opportunity to revisit our current foster, Max. Um, because Max has been with us for 6 months. He is a bit of a behavioral case. He has shown, dog reactivity on leash, and he has shown stranger danger reactivity. Now, he does not have a bite history. He has never bitten anyone, but he is not an easygoing dog, and therefore, my husband and I have to take a lot of steps to make sure that we have Max in the environment that's gonna be the best for him. So I thought that with talking to you about compassion fatigue, it might be a great opportunity for us to give everybody an update on where we're at with Max. And so he's going to be our foster spotlight for today. So, in just a couple of hours, we're going to have our second training session with a trainer who's coming in and working a lot with us on the steps that we can take to make sure that we can kind of desensitize him to that stranger danger and to that leash reactivity. And we've already seen a tremendous amount of progress. We have figured out the way to introduce him to people so that he does feel safe, he does feel comfortable, and he can just enjoy the time he's spending with people as opposed to feeling like he is on the defense, which is, of course, what gets us into trouble anytime a dog feels like they're on the defense, or any animal for that matter. And we're going to be working on dog leash reactivity because even though Max is dog friendly, he certainly does not come across that way on the leash. And so we want to make sure that we can kind of calm that behavior. So we will be working on that today. But we've seen a tremendous amount of improvement in Max, and we know that Max's perfect family is out there. We do think that his perfect family includes a house that doesn't necessarily have people coming, strangers coming and going constantly in and out all the time. So while Max is kid friendly and we know that he would love his own kids, his own family, unfortunately, a lot of houses that have children in it do see a lot of other children coming in and out in a kind of a maybe an unpredictable way. Neighborhood kids come over after school, that kind of thing. And we do not believe that that's going to be the best environment for Max to thrive in. We also know that his perfect house is going to be one that has a lot of enrichment, a lot of exercise so that he can get some of his kind of craziness out on a regular basis. Like, for example, today we took him and our resident dog, Cheese, for like an hour-long hike in like a foot of snow. So they're exhausted, and that's great because they just were running around. So we know that Max's family is out there. If you are interested in learning more about Max, you can certainly check out my Instagram page where I have videos of him. You can check out his profile. I'll have the link for it in the show notes. You can check out crossyourpaws.com and you can find his bio there if you're interested in learning more about Max. So that's our foster spotlight for today, our boy Max. But Jen, I can't even begin to thank you. I feel I don't know if you're taking on patients, but if you want to talk a little bit about that, certainly could use somebody in my life. But no, I honestly, you obviously you have such a depth and of knowledge when it comes to this, and you come from such an empathetic place about the struggles that people and it doesn't seem like it is limited to animal rescue, right? And if you're in a situation where you're experiencing these symptoms, whatever that looks like, how do we address that and how do we deal with that? And I love all of the workshops that you have and the book that you have. All of those links will be in the show notes as well. But I very much appreciate you taking time out of your Sunday to speak with me today.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure. Like I said, anytime I get, that metaphorical mountain to scream off of, I'm going to take advantage of it. So I really appreciate the invite.
So tell us the name of your podcast for those that are interested in adding it to their listening.
Yes, it is called Beyond Compassion Fatigue, and you can listen to it, most places like Apple, Spotify, a bunch of the other ones.
Okay, great. I'll be sure to link that in the show notes as well. And Jen and I now follow each other on Instagram, so you can find her profile on my Instagram page, which I believe that's also Beyond Compassion Fatigue. That's the handle.
That's the handle. And I also reluctantly started a TikTok channel, account, whatever you call it. And
Yeah,
it's
you're
the
braver
same.
than I am.
Yeah, it's the same handle. It's Beyond Compassion Fatigue.
Okay, awesome. And then of course she does have her current her current book out right now, which is To Save a Starfish, a compassion fatigue workbook for the animal welfare warrior. As far as this podcast is concerned, you can follow us on Instagram at the Foster Files Podcast. If you think that I should be talking to somebody like Jen, you can send me an email at the fosterfilespodcast@gmail.com. But again, Jen, I am so grateful for your time today.
Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate it.
And remember, everyone, be kind to animals and be kind to yourselves.